Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's wolfnyc, WOLFNYC.com. Robert, Bryce, welcome back to the What is Money Show.
Happy to be with you, Robert.
Glad to have you back. Last time we spoke, we were in London at the ARC conference.
That's right.
You were my first guest for an in-person interview there. Thank you for doing that.
It was great fun.
Yeah, good time. Just by way of quick reintroduction for you, you are the host of the Power Hungry podcast, and you are also the co-producer of the new docu-series Juice, Power, Politics, and the Grid. Maybe just before we jump in, what are you doing over at the Power Hungry podcast? What are you guys talking about? What are the topics?
Sure.
What are you typically going into there?
Sure. So I've been doing it now. Thank you for having me on. Great to be back on again. On the Power Hungry podcast, my signature lines, we talk about energy, power, innovation, and politics. So that gives me pretty wide runway in terms of people I can have on and discuss. So, we've talked about crypto. We talked about, a whole lot of things on the podcast, but a lot lately has been on our focus on the electric grid, which of course is the focus of the new docu-series, juicetheseries.com. Did I mention juicetheseries.com, Robert? Juicetheseries.com is where you want to go for the new docu-series, 5-part docu-series. But that, the new docu-series, the book that I published now 4 years ago, A Question of Power, Electricity, and the Wealth of Nations, it's all part of the work that I've been doing the last few years, really focusing on electricity, because electricity is the key. It's the form of energy we crave over every other. It's really the difference maker between the rich countries and the poor countries. And over the next few years, we should see massive increases in electricity demand globally as people get wealthier. And then also, things like AI, data centers, crypto, all these things that are happening seem to indicate that we're going to be needing, in the US anyway, more power. But it's clearly growing like gangbusters in places like China, India, Indonesia, et cetera.
Very cool. Yeah, I think we're getting kind of a stark lesson in how important energy is in the past few years, as we've seen, U.S. kind of focusing on propping up the bond market while, Russia has focused on holding energy markets strong. And just points to really the importance of energy in everything, right? It is everything. It's the whole point of the economy really, is to harness and channel more energy. And if individuals aren't playing that game properly, then they definitely stand to suffer, as I think the U.S. largely has in the past few years. I had Luke Groman on for a recent episode, and we were just going through what the U.S. has been up to. And one of the things that really struck me was that we have been sending oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve of the U.S. to some of our allied countries. And so that's obviously strategically unfavorable for the U.S. And at the same time, those countries are having to sell U.S. treasuries to pay for the oil, which is also unfavorable for the U.S. So just this weird situation we've been in, but it all grounds out ultimately in energy,
Yeah.
and it's just the biggest topic. So I think it's really cool that you're focused on that, and obviously its impact on politics. You mentioned juicetheseries.com.
Yes.
I actually watched episode 1 of your docu-series.
Right.
Thought it was very interesting, and I think it would make a great frame for our conversation today. So let's dive into that. What happened in Texas on February 14th, 2021?
Sure. Well, it's a good place to start because Robert, that was the motivation. Being, I live in Austin, Texas. I live in the center of town, and my wife Lauren and I were blacked out for 48 hours. My colleague Tyson Culver, who directed this docuseries and did a great job. I mean, just put it all together. You know, I don't know how to handle the camera and do all that stuff. The editing, he did all of that and oversaw all of it. Did a fantastic job putting all these things together over the last 3 years. But after, in the wake of the blackout, I had power. I'm sorry, I had water. Tyson lost power, lost water at his house. So he came to my house to borrow, to get water because he, for whatever reason, he didn't have any water pressure at his house. But so, of course, there was the thaw. And then afterward, we heard all these news reports, including from the now former CEO of ERCOT, Bill Magnus, who said that in the entire ERCOT grid, which covers most of Texas, 26 million people or so, was within 4 or 5 minutes of complete collapse. Well, had that happened, tens of thousands of people would have died. I mean, it would have been a mass mortality event. It would have been, we would have had, just a catastrophe. And getting the grid restarted likely would have taken months. So the narrowness with which in Texas just escaped this catastrophic failure of the electric grid really motivated us. And we talked to friends of ours. They said, sure, we'll help you. And so that set us on this journey. We interviewed now, more than 30 people. We have 34 on-camera interviews in this 5-part docuseries. But really the purpose of the project, and it really began with the Winter Storm Uri and the blackouts that during that time frame. What is the purpose of this project? We want to make people, first and foremost, we want to make people and policymakers understand the importance of the electric grid. It's our most important energy network, why it's being fragilized, why it's become more and more vulnerable, and what we need to do to fix it. And in a word, that's nuclear.
Mm. Yeah, so as I saw the episode, it said 26 million people live in the ERCOT service area, which is what, the regulated utility of Texas? Is that what it is?
No, ERCOT is one of the ISOs or RTOs around the country. So different regions of the country have these, they're called regional transmission organizations or independent system operators. So in California, they have CAISO, CAISO, that oversees the grid in California. We're in Texas. We have ERCOT, Electric Reliability Corporation of Texas, Council of Texas. In New England, it's ISO New England. In New York, it's New York ISO. So different regions have this. I guess you'd compare it to a traffic cop, but it is the entity, the agency that runs the grids in the grid in these different locations. And so there is some overlap in these different grids, not much between Texas and the rest of the US, but these different grids, these different ISOs, they are many of them are interconnected, interdependent. But it's all this crazy quilt of different regulation, different entities, different co-ops and investor-owned utilities, community-owned utilities, government-owned agencies, TVA, Bonneville Power. It's a crazy quilt that all somehow works. And it's amazing that it does. But that was, again, one of the reasons why we made this docuseries was to underscore the complexity and the fragility of the system.
So it was 26 million people in the ERCOT service area, and 80% of them lost power for up to a week in this February 14th, 2021 event.
Right.
I think in the documentary, it also said between 200 and 900 people died as a result. I think it was basically an extreme Arctic blast, right?
Right. Yeah.
And there was a great quote in there that just, I think, highlighted the importance of energy and the grid. I don't know who said this, but they wrote, or they said, quote, "The energy grid is a civilizational life support system, and without it, modern society collapses very quickly." What is it? Why? I mean, I guess maybe it's somewhat intuitive when you stop and think about how many things involve electricity that you use and
Sure.
do every day. But what is it
Right.
about the energy grid that makes it so critical to civilization?
Well, if you think about the electric grid, and I just talked about, these different entities that are part of it, and then you have the different public utility commissions like Texas, or you're in Florida, or different states have their different regulators. They're all overseeing little parts of it, right? But the reality is that the fundamental message, and it's one of the main messages of the docu-series, this is our most important energy network, and all of our other critical societal networks depend on it. So our healthcare system, our hospitals, the traffic lights, communication, water and wastewater, they all require electricity, and reliable electricity for them to work all the time. And that quote, you're right, it is a great quote. And that's from my friend, Dr. Chris Kiefer, who's an ER doctor in Toronto. And he's one of the stars of episode 4, where we go to Canada and talk about the nuclear comeback there. But, Kiefer really underscores that. And it's a great line, the civilizational life support system. And that's just it, right? All of these systems that we take for granted depend on the mother network being the electric grid.
If you are a business owner or manager, you should know these three numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000 is the number of businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, which allows you to streamline accounting, financial management, human resources, and more. NetSuite turns 25 years old this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days rather than weeks, and to drive down cost. And finally, 1, because your business is one of a kind. So with NetSuite, you get a customized solution for all your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth. NetSuite is everything you need all in one place. Right now, you can download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/whatismoney. That's netsuite.com/whatismoney to get your free KPI checklist. Again, netsuite.com/whatismoney. Yeah, I mean, I can't even think of any industrial process that does not involve energy as an input.
Right.
And mostly in the form of electricity. I mean, I guess oil would be the other big one. But it's like, obviously, right? Energy is, how do we define it? As the capacity to do work. So if we want to get anything done whatsoever, we need energy as an input.
Right.
So
Energy is the ability to do work, and power is the rate at which work gets done. And
okay.
I often say we don't care about energy. What we want is power, right? We don't care. I have a pickup truck. I'd put sawdust or Fruit Loops or, Captain Crunch cereal in the tank if I thought it would give me the motive power that I want, right? We don't really care what we put in the trunk or in the tank. We care that we have this, this lighting power, this, amplification power, the communication power. That's what we're after. And so, we often talk about electricity as the power grid, or the power went out. So we've even correlated or juxtaposed this very important word, right, in physics, right? Energy and power are not the same thing. They're different things.
Yeah.
But now we equate the idea of power with electricity. Yeah. And that's profound because we take it so for granted. And again, that's one of the main motivations for why we did this project.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it then. Energy is the capacity to do work, but power is the rate at which work gets done.
Right.
And so what we're really looking to do, if we're trying to increase productivity, it's we want to increase power, right? Energy per unit time.
Because we care about rates. We don't care about a rate is more telling than a sum.
Yeah.
Right. So if you have 1,000 gallons of gasoline, well, okay, that's energy. But if you're putting it into, a hot rod and it, some, say, I don't know, Dodge Charger, and it's got 600 horsepower, well, then you're turning that energy potential into a super hot race car, right? That you can go at, 200 miles an hour or something. But, you're a crypto guy, Bitcoin guy, right? That is the critical thing fundamentally what cryptocurrency is about that arbitrage between power and money, right? With cryptocurrency crypto being a form of money that is created by using power to convert it into these units of work into something that is, that lives on the interweb.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a very, I mean, the first guest on the show, Michael Saylor, his definition of money was money is the highest form of energy that human beings can channel. Which
Uh-huh.
again, if you're talking about channeling energy, that implies moving it per unit time. So it really
Right.
is. It's the old adage, right? Money is power. It's interesting though that yeah, Bitcoin allows us to convert physical power, in this case, electricity, directly into money. That's something
Yeah.
that's sort of novel. Um,
And Art Berman, I've had him on he's an oil guy, oil analyst. He says energy is the economy.
yeah,
Doomberg, who's on Substack, says energy is life. Well,
yeah,
if you think about oil as a form of money, you turn energy into money and money into energy, right? So
yeah,
these things are they're two sides of the same coin,
yeah,
right? But it's our ability to turn that energy into useful power.
yeah,
That's the key, right? And
yeah.
we're getting better and better and better at it. And I think, one of the things we should probably touch on as we're talking here is, well, what about the grid and what's the future of the grid? And it's not much we don't talk we talk about it some in the docu-series because we come out very pro nuclear.
Yeah.
But is the grid going to be able to handle all this new demand from data centers for AI, for all the new crypto? And where will then these data centers live? Are they going to, more of them going to go to Iceland, or where will they go to find the cheapest power? Because that's going to be the key for a lot of these, for a lot of this push into AI. And I'm skeptical, I got to tell you, about the ability of the U.S. grid to grow more quickly enough to accommodate all of this new apparent demand or rumored demand coming from AI, because we're talking tens of gigawatts, and the system just can't expand very quickly.
Hmm. So yeah, going back to the documentary,
Sure.
what was the role of wind turbines specifically in the failure of the grid on this February 14th, 2021 event?
Sure. Um, so the way I frame it, Robert, is and the overall issue is that Meredith Angwin talks about this in the first episode, and she wrote this great book, Shorting the Grid, uncovering the hidden fragility of our electric grid. And she calls it the fatal trifecta, which is that the grid has become too reliant on weather dependent renewables, too
Mhm.
reliant on just in time natural gas, and too reliant on imports.
Mhm.
So, what happened in Texas in the near failure of the grid? We're the first two, right? We can't import much power from other states. We don't have that interconnection, right? ERCOT is kind of an
Mhm.
island, which I don't think is really that important. I think, lots of island economies in the world, or island grids in the world. But I think we became too dependent on gas as opposed to other sources of generation like nuclear and coal that have on-site fuel storage. And then we were too reliant on wind. And during critical times when the grid was, reaching peak demand, wind and solar went to Cancun with Ted Cruz. They just weren't available, right?
Mhm.
So it wasn't just that wind disappeared, because when it's really hot and really cold, the wind doesn't blow. So this is no surprise. But a lot of people say, well, it's only wind. Well, it's not only wind, and I'm a longtime critic of the wind business, proudly so. But it was the fact that these weather dependent generation forms, when you have extreme weather, they don't work well, and so you need lots of thermal generation all the time for
Mm.
those periods when you can't count on wind and solar.
So wind and solar are intermittent. Would that be the right
That's right.
term?
Yeah.
Um, and so what's going on? You said just in time natural gas
Right.
also is the second part of that trifecta, the fatal
Yeah.
trifecta for the grid,
Right.
and imports. What's going on with just in time natural gas? Is that just what does that mean, first of all?
Sure. Well, so just in time, this is a technology, or an idea. The Japanese automakers, I think, were the ones who really perfected it. That you don't stack up tires at the factory until you are ready to put them on the car, right? Because it
Mm-hmm.
takes a long time to put them in the warehouse and whatever. So that's just in time, right? You deliver the tires when they're ready to be put onto the vehicle, right? You don't stack them up and wait.
So you're
Well,
minimizing inventory, carrying cost, and all that.
right, right.
Gotcha.
So that's in manufacturing, but in
Yeah.
natural gas, because it is a gas, it's carried in pipelines, and it comes effectively straight, not exactly straight from the wellhead. It'll be
Yeah.
processed at a processing plant, but it almost flows directly from the well in the ground into the burner tip at the power station or at the furnace in your house, right? It doesn't, you don't stack it up in the yard.
Right.
Whereas with coal, you can stack up big old, mounds of coal out there in
Right.
next to the power plant. The same with nuclear plants. You can have, the uranium enriched uranium is on site. You have on site storage. You could even say the same about oil fired generation. So you have a diesel gen set. Well, you got a big old tank of diesel fuel. So you have on site fuel. It's not just in time. So you've stored it. But gas has very low density, so it's very hard to store. You can overpressure the pipeline, but you can't store a great deal of it anywhere. You have to, keep it moving and keep it, and you can put it in the ground into, abandoned caverns and so on, but it has to be moving. And so that's where the idea of just in time.
Gotcha. And then obviously the third leg of that trifecta was imports, which is just dependence on others, basically.
Right. And,
So
and that's the key too, because Texas doesn't have big interconnects with other states. As I said, that doesn't really matter. If you have a good design of your grid, it doesn't matter if you're an island. There are plenty of island economies in the world that have island grids. But for instance, in California, was it last year or the year before, during the summertime, they were having power shortages. They couldn't go to Arizona and say, "Hey, send us some more juice," because it was hot in Arizona too.
Yeah.
So this idea that, we'll get it from somebody else. Well, no, you're gambling on your own grid's ability to be reliable by saying, we're going to rely on somebody else. Well, those other people, those other sources, they won't, when it's crisis time, they're going to say, we got plenty to do here. You find your own power.
Right. It's counterparty risk, basically. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Yeah. So I think I'm starting to get maybe a framing for this. Energy, as you said, the capacity to do work, is more like a stock, whereas when I'm talking about stocks and flows here, not a stock like you buy in the stock market. So energy is like a stock of capacity to do work. Power is the actual flow, right? You're actually moving that capacity in.
Exactly.
You're putting it to work, basically. And so with coal, you can accumulate a stock of energy. Yeah. But with these renewables, you're really just tapping a flow, basically. Sounds like they're hard, if not impossible, to stockpile. And so that,
unless you have batteries, right? Which is the other kind of the key, the key wild card here. But will you have enough when, in Winter Storm Uri, it was cold for a week. There aren't any batteries that are going to work for a week, right? They'll work for maybe 4 hours, 8 hours, maybe a day, depending on how much you're drawing. And they have their own requirements for metals, minerals, et cetera, that you have to maintain. So this, the key here is, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Power is a measure of energy flow. We don't give a crap about energy unless we can make it flow. Right. 1 million barrels in the oil is worthless. 1 million barrels per day, that's a whole different story, because that means you're making it flow. So 1 million barrels per day is actually a power term because it's energy over time. So, got it. So that's and again, going back to the crypto idea, that's the key there. You're using energy flows to create money, a form of money.
Yeah. And so to use a monetary metaphor, perhaps, that is making sense in my mind, let me know if it makes sense in yours as well.
Sure.
The stock is basically a buffer against uncertainty. If I've got a huge stockpile of coal and the power goes out, well, then I can burn the coal over time and make ends meet while the income goes away. So the stock is more like a savings account.
Yeah.
And the flow is more like income, basically, is where I was going with that.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's good.
And so this maybe segues into the next question. One of the interviewees in the episode says that politicians, like most of us, are energy blind. And the same, that what struck me about that, being the guy that talks about money all the time, is that the same seems to be true for people and politicians in general about money, as they're money blind.
Yeah.
Meaning, not to say that they don't pursue money, but meaning that they misunderstand the history and nature of money. They don't understand how it works, which I think is what
Yeah.
he was getting at when he was talking about energy, right? Obviously, politicians use electricity and et cetera, drive cars, but they don't seem to understand how fundamental it is to the economy. Why? My question is, why do you think there's such a widespread misunderstanding about both energy and money? Is this a failing of the
Mm.
educational system? Is this these are just complex areas that we haven't figured out yet? Like, what's going on?
It's a really good question. I joke about this, right? And that our energy policy is made by lawyers. Well, that's a problem, right?
Mm,
Having energy policy made by lawyers, and why are they lawyers? Because they couldn't do the math to get into engineering school, right? So
mm,
we've got
mm,
we got a
mm,
bunch of bad policy being made by people who don't understand a thing about energy and power.
mm.
But it takes, I guess, to answer your question directly, it takes a while to understand, and I'm still learning, right? Even though I've done this now, written about energy and power systems for more than 30 years, I'm still learning, right? Because it's not hard, but it's not easy either, right? It takes
Sure.
a little bit of sitting and thinking about it to understand what energy is and what power is.
Hmm.
And the same, I think, is true of money, because it's an abstract notion, right? And
Hmm.
so is energy, right? Well, what is it? Well, energy is something we can use to do work, and money is something we can use to get, work done for us, right? We
Hmm.
trade
Hmm.
time for money and money for time,
Yeah.
right? So, and that's another way to think about energy, is it's a call on it's a way to think about time. Energy
Hmm.
saves us time.
Yes.
So these are all interconnected ideas, and that idea about energy being a way to manipulate time is from my friend Kosuke Furutachi. Wrote a great book that sold very well in Japan,
Mm.
um, talking about this very issue about energy being a way to manipulate time and save time. And the more
Hmm.
energy we
Hmm.
use, the more time we save, which
Hmm.
makes a lot of sense if you think about it. If you had to, crush all say you're making hummus and you're trying to crush all the beans, well, you do it by
Yeah.
hand. It's going to take you a lot of time. But if you have a blender and you can use electricity, it happens like that, right? So
Yeah.
you've used energy to save time in the kitchen, but there are many examples of that.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Um, yeah. So energy as a means of manipulating time. I think we're again sort of re-articulating economics in a way. One of the ways capital is described in economics is that it puts you closer in time to your goal. For instance, if you want to go from New York to Los Angeles and the only goods you have are tennis shoes, well, it's going to take you, I don't know, 3, 6 months, however long it takes to walk. But
Right.
if you have a more sophisticated capital good like an automobile, well, then you can do it in 30 hours or whatever it
Right.
is. If
Sure.
you have an even more sophisticated piece of equipment like an airplane, you can do it in 4 hours.
Sure.
So there's this idea that, capital really is just that thing that closes the gap of time between you and what your aim is.
Right.
The amount of space didn't change between New York and Los Angeles, but by using different goods, you change how close that goal is to you in time. So that sounds like it's closely related to this idea of energy as a means for manipulating time.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's, to bring it back to electricity and the docu-series, juicetheseries.com. Did I mention juicetheseries.com? I hope I mentioned juicetheseries.com. The docu-series is free. It's available. You can find it. It's on YouTube and obviously at juicetheseries.com. But we make that clear point, right? That the importance of this energy network is fundamental to the working of society. So
Yeah.
if we think about society and our desire to save time, to do more work, to have more free time to do the things that we need to get done, if we don't have electricity, we're screwed.
Yeah.
And so we've seen, that's a point we make in the film, that since 2000, the number of blackouts across the grid in the United States have gone up 13-fold.
Wow.
So why is Generac doing such a great business? It's because the grid is faltering.
Mm.
So people are responding to this reduction in the reliability of the grid in a very rational way, and that is putting more power, standby gen sets in their homes or in their businesses. And,
Is that's what Generac is? Just these standalone
Generac,
generators? Okay.
that's right. They make mostly for the residential sector. They
Gotcha.
make standby generators. And they've done a fire sale business. Their stock has done enormously well, not up far off of the highs that it reached about 2 years ago, but still, they're building these things as fast as they can, and there's a very long wait list, as I understand it, for getting a new one installed, and it's because people are noticing the grid isn't reliable as it used to be. I mean,
Yeah.
I live here in the middle of Austin. We've had 3 extended blackouts in my neighborhood since August.
Wow.
I mean, we had one just the other night that lasted 8 hours, because of old equipment. So all these things are top of mind. And I'm hoping that one of the goals of the docu-series is we get policymakers to understand what the risks are, because the problem, as I said before too, is that the grid is so diffused, the ownership is so diffused, no one is ultimately responsible. So we've got to figure out ways to make all of these people, things, entities work together to focus on the reliability issue.
Over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Anthony DiClementi last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Yeah, so much to consider. One of the other things that really jumped out to me in episode 1 was when I thought of the grid, I really just thought of the physical infrastructure, right? Like the power lines and the power generation and, whatever, wind turbines, batteries, etc. But there's a lot more layers to it than that.
Yeah.
You go through the physical grid, the policy grid, and the political grid.
Sure.
Could you just expand upon what the grid is in its totality and what these different layers mean?
Sure. Well, so I mentioned my friend Meredith Angwin earlier, and her terrific book, and she's one of the stars of the film. Which is a remarkable thing in and of itself. She's a grandmother who lives in rural Vermont, self-published her own book, and in her, her twilight years, let's be clear, she's not young anymore. She's become one of the most noted experts on electricity in America, which is remarkable in itself. But she says the grid is all of the stuff that it takes to get power into our hands, right? It's all of the stuff, right? The wires, the poles, the transformers, the generation, blah, 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 all that stuff. That's the grid. But the thing to keep in mind is that it's because it's so big and so diffused, you don't have necessarily, and it's one of the things here in Texas after the blackouts, we didn't know, ERCOT said, well, we designed the market failed. Well, why did the market fail? Well, ultimately because you set up a bad market. So, it's an abstract notion of what the grid is, but we have to somehow make it more concrete so people understand we have to address the reliability issues here. And it's partly federal, it's partly state, it's partly local. And that makes it a very difficult issue to wrestle to the ground. And, policymakers, they want glib answers. Oh, well, I did this, and in fact, one of the congressmen here from Texas introduced a bill just a few days ago that would require Texas to interconnect its grid with the rest of the United States. Well, what does he know about it? I mean, and why does he know that this is a good policy? But, again, it's one of these kind of glib notions that, oh, well, we'll just do this and it'll fix it. Well, not necessarily.
Hmm. So what?
And that would be the political grid, by the way. I mean, I
That's the political grid. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So then I guess I'm trying to disentangle the policy grid and the political grid. What's going on there? So the policy is just the laws that are written, and the political grid are the people that are writing the laws. Is that right?
Well, think of it this way, Robert. I mean, if you start, and it's a point we make in the docu-series that, what's at stake here? Well, electricity sales in the United States on average every year now are something like $500 billion. I mean, it's just an enormous business. And there are 3,000 different electricity providers. You've got 800 or so cooperatives. You've got 2,000 community-owned utilities like here in Austin Energy. You have the investor-owned utilities. You have TVA, Bonneville, et cetera. I mentioned those before. But they all work in this political grid as well, where everybody's just trying to get a little piece. Well, I just want this little subsidy for this thing because this is going to be good for everybody, and it's renewable this, renewable that. And everybody wants a little piece. So it's all ultimately comes down to the money, and the policy grid and the political grid then affect, to your earlier point about the physical grid, which is the transformers and the poles and the rest of it. But all of these are factors that are determining what that physical grid looks like, because and why is there so much wrangling about it? Because there's just staggering amounts of money involved.
Interesting. You used a term a minute ago talking about ERCOT, saying that they claimed this event. I assumed, correct me if I'm wrong, ERCOT was claiming that the February 14th, 2021 event was a market failure.
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily ERCOT was that was their conclusion, but in the wake of it, everybody was standing around and saying, well, who's responsible here? Right. And why did this happen? Who's in charge of reliability?
Right.
Well, no one was in charge of reliability, because in this restructured market, that was Ken Lay's term. Ken Lay, the former CEO of Enron. Remember in episode 2, that's what we talk about. That episode is called Undermined by Enron. Enron went first to Britain, then to California, then to Texas, and say, hey, we got a better business model for you. We'll deregulate the electric sector, and we'll have everybody compete, and it'll be great for the consumer, great for competition, great for capitalism. And a lot of people said, hey, that's awesome. Great. We'll create a market and we'll make everyone compete. Well, you create the market. Well, then who's ultimately responsible? No one, because the market is not accountable, right? Whereas under the old utility model, where you have one company and it's a monopoly, then you have one CEO who is in charge of all the generation units, the wires, the poles, the meters, everything. And you got one set of accountability chain back to, let's say Texas Utilities or Houston Lighting and Power. These are old companies now out of business, or Duke, Alliant, then you have someone accountability there. But when you set up this restructured market where everybody's trying to compete and it's energy only, as they say, no one's accountable. So that's a problem. And so that again goes back to the physical grid, policy grid, political grid, all of these working together, because everybody's trying to figure out, well, how do we make money here? And and it's the complexity is just truly staggering.
So do you think that's a genuine market failure then, that you actually do need a monopoly in the energy sector for the market to function?
Thanks to my friends at Swan Bitcoin for supporting the show. Swan sponsored the Sailor series, and I appreciate their support from the very beginning of the What is Money show, and I'm happy to welcome them back. Swan has grown a lot since then. They've built a full-service Bitcoin-centric financial services company with several different offerings. With the Swan app, you can set up instant and recurring Bitcoin buys, and with this, you can get started at swan.com/breedlove. Swan also enables clients in the US to hold Bitcoin directly in an IRA account, so you can hold Bitcoin in a tax-advantaged way. Get started at swan.com/IRA. If you're looking to buy more than $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, check out Swan Private. You'll get concierge support for buy execution, retirement accounts, inheritance and estate planning, and access to exclusive events, research, and other content. Get started at swan.com/private. Swan Institutional provides financial services to institutions, including Bitcoin-backed lending, asset management, principal investments, Bitcoin services for financial advisors, and Bitcoin mining operations. For those new to Bitcoin, I recommend checking out Swan's Welcome to Bitcoin course at swan.com/welcome. So go to swan.com/breedlove today to get started on your Bitcoin buying journey.
That's a good question. Meredith has talked about this before, and she said, people accuse me, I'm using her phrases here, accuse me of being in favor of monopolies. And she said, I'm not necessarily in favor of monopolies. What I am in favor of is accountability. And that's what we've lost. So am I going to say here, by God, we need monopoly utilities? Well, I'm not sure I'm ready to say that, but I think that what we've lost is this understanding of what electricity is. And we're treating it like a commodity when in actuality, it's a service. And it's a critical service that we cannot allow to fail. So if it's a service, then it has to be more heavily regulated, because then it's public service commission, right? Then you need some accountability there. Am I smart enough to figure it out and say, this is the, absolute correct answer? No, I'm not. But I am in favor of accountability. I'm in favor of responsibility, and I'm in favor of a rethinking of our understanding of the electric grid and how we best manage it.
Is insurance a possible solution to that quagmire? That, if there's no accountability, say it's just a free market and there's no monopoly, that somehow people can ensure that they have some degree of service, service level agreement, reliability, something like that.
Well, I'm sure there could be. And my brother's in the insurance business, very proud of my brother Wally, and he's been his whole career in that. And so, but imagine if you're on an oxygen machine or, a respirator or something, and the power grid fails and you're about to keel over dead, $1 million of insurance doesn't do you much good because you don't have any power, right? You're going to be dying there because the power grid doesn't work. So, but to go back to the idea of insurance, let's go back to Generac. What are people doing? They're buying their own insurance in the form of having the power generation capacity themselves, or a battery, Tesla Powerwall or something like that. People are creating their own insurance themselves to insulate themselves from this increasingly intermittent sources, these increasingly unreliable sources of generation.
That's interesting. So it's almost like a decentralized insurance policy on the centralized power distribution model.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, and no, you're interested in crypto, and that, or your business is crypto. What we're seeing now in Texas is some of these miners setting up out in West Texas where they're getting cheap power because there's a lot of wind energy out there that's stranded. So they're running their data centers on wind. And then when there's a higher power demand on the grid, they're shutting down, right? Yeah. So they're playing that arbitrage game between the availability of power and when power is cheap and when power is dear. So they're playing it kind of in two different ways, arbitraging the juice into cash, and then going the other way, collecting cash when the juice is dear.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And that's where, I think Bitcoin shines in that respect too, as kind of a load balancer and an energy buyer, right? Energy buyer, what do you say of both first resort and last resort? I guess last resort would be the case where grid demand is low and you can just sell it to the Bitcoin miners. But it's also occasionally an energy buyer first resort if you're trying to bring an energy production asset online that might not be connected to the grid. You could just basically mine Bitcoin with it as capacity comes online. So Bitcoin's very interesting how it interconnects with this market. Let's see here. So, okay, how was it determined that the energy industry is a natural monopoly and therefore not improvable by free market competition? Was this just decided by government, or how did we end up with this monopolized model? Was this just a product of government interference, or how did we get to this sort of standard? I think it's a standard basically everywhere, right? That we have central power monopolies.
Well, so let's be clear about where the monopoly works. So let's go back to the time of Edison, 1882 on Pearl Street in Lower Manhattan. He sets up the first central power plant. He is an integrated monopoly, right? He owns the power plant. He owns the wires. He owns the lights at his clients', businesses and residences, including one of his first clients was the New York Times. He was selling light, was ultimately what he was selling, right? Because that was what people used electricity for. That was the only use for it. So he was completely accountable for the entire system, right? So for most of the era of the rapid growth in the electric power sector, you had that vertically integrated monopoly. But then, regulators decided, oh, that's too heavy. We know, we need to break this up. And so they did, and they did in some cases now this restructuring model that I mentioned earlier that Enron promoted. But that's far different from, say, in gasoline or in oil or natural gas or coal or something. So the electricity sector, yes, it is a natural monopoly because of the nature of the business, the nature of the electron, right? That it's a service. Whereas oil, well, I can look at one, fuel station. Well, they're charging $2.20 across the street. It's $2.30. Well, I'm going to go to the one over here, right? So I have choice because that's an easy differential, right? Whereas if I want to choose between electricity, I've only got one wire coming into my house. So there's a natural monopoly aspect to that has been ignored, right? And there's been efforts to kind of go around this, but it's created this, again, this incredibly complex system of regulation that you need a full-time lawyer lobbyist to understand it.
Interesting. Towards the end of this episode, there was a book mentioned. This was Ted Koppel's book titled Lights Out. And I think the commentator in the documentary asserted that, I guess this is from the book, that if the U.S. electrical grid went down for a few months, that between 50 and 60% of the U.S. population would die.
Right.
That sounds very extreme,
sobering, yes,
and dire and grim. What are your views on that? Is that a realistic scenario, and what should we be doing to prevent such a catastrophic outcome?
Well, there are other books besides Lights Out that have looked at this. And Koppel's book is, it's good. There was another one, I think it's called 1 Minute After by Forsyth, I think, where it's a fictional book where he talks about the use of an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, that would fry the grid and people wouldn't have electricity. And so, yes, but there's no doubt that, even if the grid is down for a few days, as we found during the Winter Storm Uri, during extreme cold, people would have frozen to death, many of them, right? It would have been wouldn't have taken months. You would have had people die in a matter of days. But I think that, from everything that I know, yes, that kind of, projection, it's certainly possible to understand that the situation would get so grim because you don't have any refrigeration. You don't have the ability to go to the store to get food. If there's no power, you're not going to be able to get gas in your car. All of these things are connected. And again, that's why, we talked about before about the civilizational life support system, about the mother network. That's the importance of the grid. Ultimately, all of these incredibly important social networks that we depend on come back to the availability of affordable, reliable, resilient electric grids.
Ooh, that's a heavy one.
And it is, but I think it's key to be optimistic, Robert, and think about why, as we look forward, we get along, we'll figure this out, but we don't only will figure it out if we're really focused on it. And if I can talk about one of the episodes in the 5 episodes, then juicetheseries.com. Did I mention juicetheseries.com? I hope I did. Episode 3 is Green Dreams, and we focus on the Osage tribe in Oklahoma. And I have deep roots in Oklahoma, both on my mother's side and my father's side. And I'm proud of being from Oklahoma. My great uncle, Ernie Rapp, was a member of the Osage tribe, who was born in 1909 in Fairfax, Oklahoma, where we just screened the film, in fact, a few days ago, at the Gray Horse Community Center. But Ernie he had a front row seat to the Reign of Terror, which was the focus of Martin Scorsese's new film, Killers of the Flower Moon.
Can you tell us about that? Actually,
sure.
Not sure what that is.
So the Killers of the Flower Moon, it's a wonderful book by David Gran, turned into an epic movie by Scorsese, and now it's up for 10 Academy Awards, I think. It's over 3 hours. It's I think it's a little too long, but it truly is a remarkable film. But it tells the story of the Reign of Terror in the 1920s, in which a group of whites were involved in a conspiracy led by a guy named Bill Hale, King Bill Hale, to murder Osage tribal members for their oil money. And it was a conspiracy that went on for years. The case was ultimately broken by the FBI and an agent named Tom White, who went to Pawhuska, Oklahoma, where the Osage tribe has their headquarters, and ultimately held trials and convicted some of the murderers, including Bill Hale. But it was a remarkable period in U.S. history and Oklahoma history. what we're focused on in episode 3 is a company called Enel, an Italian company that went into Osage County, Oklahoma, and installed 84 wind turbines in Osage County, despite the objections of the Osage tribe. In fact, the tribe warned them over and over, you're putting those wind turbines out there, you're going to be violating our mineral estate. The Osage owned the minerals, all including oil and gas and the rocks under the surface in all of Osage County. Well, Enel went in there and built their wind turbines despite being told by the Bureau of Indian Affairs not to do it. So it's just a truly remarkable story. We have on-camera interviews with 5 members of the tribe. We recorded those interviews over the last 2.5 years. And now just in December, a federal court judge in Tulsa, my hometown, ruled with the tribe and ruled that all 84 of those turbines have to be taken down. It's a landmark ruling. I mean, a really important ruling and an affirmation of tribal sovereignty, an affirmation of the Osage tribe's fight for their rights, and a big black eye for the wind business, a huge black eye for the wind business. Now, you didn't read about this in the New York Times because they're not going to cover it, right? This doesn't fit the narrative around clean energy. But anyway, this episode, I think, is really compelling. It's in the news now. We're focused on that in several of the screenings we've been doing in Dallas, Tulsa, Fairfax, et cetera, in Denver as well. But I'm particularly happy that the tribe won in court in this case. And when they start taking those turbines down, I'm going to be there, brother. I'm going to be up there watching them take those things down, because I know a bunch of Osage tribal members are going to be out there dancing. They're going to be hooping and hollering, as I will too.
Well, that's fantastic. What was the Scorsese film you said?
It's called Killers of the Flower Men. It's been nominated for 10 Academy Awards, including Lily Gladstone is up for Best Actress. She plays I forgot the name of the character that she's playing, but she plays a real life, and it's the book by David Grann, which I also recommend, is remarkable. But it's this is all based on the real life events. This isn't something that Scorsese made up or Grann made up. I'm going to look up Lily Gladstone and Killers.
Book of the same title then, Killers of the Flower.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
While you're looking that up, what do you suggest people do to prepare for the possibility of a multi-month electrical grid failure? Is it just a matter of stack some gin tracks? Like, what else should people be thinking about, in advance of something like that?
Sure. And by the way, Lily Gladstone played Molly Burkhart, and the Burkharts are a big clan in the Osage tribe. And she did a remarkable job. I mean, really a remarkable performance. But what can people do? It's funny that you ask, because I don't have a standby generator. Although now I'm thinking, well, what am I doing? Right? Why am I not doing this? I have 8.5 kilowatts of solar panels on my house, but I don't have storage here. And a friend of mine, I know he's selling battery systems. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not sure if I want a battery, fire risk and the rest of it. But I am thinking about getting a Generac. But then my gas line is on one side of the house. The main power line is on the other side. I'm thinking, damn, it's going to cost a ton of money. But what should people be doing? I think, be prepared, right? That's the Boy Scout motto. And I told you, we've had 3 blackouts here in our house and that extended for 7 or 8 hours. One was in August, one was in September, and one was just the other day. So the grid, there's just no doubt that the grid is becoming less and less reliable. Some of that is because of the generation mix. Some of this is just the fact that the grid is getting older, right? Yeah. Because all kinds of equipment wear out and have to be replaced. And so the challenge now is that we have to make the grid more resilient, more reliable at the same time, and build more while we're also maintaining all the existing stuff. So none of this is going to be cheap, quick, or easy.
Are you sick of being robbed by politicians through inflation and endless money printing? If so, you need to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 25th through 27th. As the largest Bitcoin and fintech conference in the world, Bitcoin 2024 stands as a beacon of monetary freedom, a glimmer of hope amongst a darkening macroeconomic backdrop. Top speakers, companies, and thought leaders from across the industry will convene in Nashville to look ahead to the next year and beyond. I will be there, and Bitcoin conferences like this have become my favorite place to socialize since becoming a Bitcoiner. Ticket prices will increase soon.
Get your tickets now and secure your spot at this game-changing event. So go to b.tc/conference and use discount code Breedlove to sign up for the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Again, that's b.tc/conference, discount code Breedlove.
Yeah. Okay. That is good advice. You mentioned earlier too that you come up pretty strong on nuclear energy
Yeah.
as being, I don't know, the best solution for power generation. Could you just give me like your spiel on nuclear? Like why? What is it that differentiates nuclear? Why is it the best in your view? And in what ways is it better than the alternatives?
Sure. Well, I'll keep this brief because I could go on, right? I could just, go long-winded on this whole thing. But for now, for 15 years, I've been saying the same thing. If we're serious about decarbonization, we need to be serious about natural gas to nuclear. N to N is what I call it. N to N, natural gas to nuclear. Natural gas, because it's super abundant globally. It's relatively low cost today, and the front month price on Henry Hub for Natty is like $1.67, which just is incredibly cheap. I mean, just on a historical basis, it's still incredibly cheap. But if we're really serious about decarbonization and for bolstering the grid and fuel diversification, we need to be serious about nuclear power. Now, will this happen? No. So why am I pro-nuclear? Well, obvious is that high power density, super high power density, which if you're in crypto and data centers, you want to have high concentrations of power in small places so you do more work, right? So more watts per square meter, that's the key. You both on the consumption end and on the generation side. And nuclear power plants are unsurpassed when it comes to power density, 2,000 watts per square meter. Wind energy is 1 watt per square meter. I don't care where you put it. Solar is 10 watts per square meter. I don't care where you put it. So we're talking about differentials that are measured in thousands and hundreds in between nuclear and weather dependent generation. So the other part, though, is simple physics. That power density, the higher the power density, the lower the resource intensity. So if you have a high power density source like nuclear, you don't have to have as much steel, as much cobalt, as much zinc, as much concrete, all these other things that are needed to make a power plant. If you have far-flung generation sources like wind and solar, wind turbines, et cetera, you need a lot more steel, copper, neodymium iron boron magnets, zinc, manganese, all these other things, that these inputs, right? Commodities that were going to help you, are required to build all of this stuff in order to harness very energy diffused sources of energy, right? Which are the solar and wind are. So higher energy density higher power density in the nuclear reactor means you don't need as much stuff. Small footprints are the environmental ideal. We don't want to cover the world, all of the countryside with this garbage. And I say that word, it's the right word. All across the country, local communities are fighting back against these wind and solar projects. The Osage are just one of them. And this is another point that I make in the film. And we documented it in the Renewable Rejection Database. We've had over 600 communities across the country have rejected or restricted wind projects, and the rejection numbers keep growing. And it's because these projects require so much land, and that covering the countryside with energy infrastructure is the opposite of green. So that's how's that for a quick summary of why I'm pro nuclear.
Pretty good. And as you're saying that, I don't know if this is an analogy or actually more of a description of why there's a lot of parallels between what you're saying and why Bitcoin proponents they advocate so strongly for Bitcoin. And I think it has to do with you use this term power density.
Right.
And that's what Bitcoin's really all about. It's purchasing power density. So if I could expand on this a little bit, anytime the purchasing power of a money goes up, right, a money becomes more valuable. Well, so too do the incentives for producers of that money to produce more of it, right? If the price of gold goes up in the market, well, then all of a sudden miners are incentivized to mine more gold, right? The same is true for fiat currency. If the dollar is strong, well, the central bank can print into that strength and dilute it.
Yeah, sure.
So if you want to have high purchasing power density in your money, your ideal money would have a fixed supply, right? Like that would be a fixed unchangeable supply that could hold a maximal amount of purchasing power density, which is another way of saying the more purchasing power you put into this thing, it doesn't increase the incentives to produce more because nobody can produce more. Basically, this is the magic of Bitcoin, right? 21 million. So I would like to venture an analogy and say that perhaps Bitcoin is the nuclear power of money because it has the greatest purchasing power density.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. I'll just throw out one quick idea. So what is power density? And this concept is not very well known, and not even among energy and power people, they don't understand it. I've been talking about it for a long time, and I think I understand it pretty well. What is power density? It's a measure of energy flow, can be harnessed from a given area, volume, or mass. So I mentioned nuclear before, 2,000 watts per square meter. That's the aerial power density. If you look at the engine in your car, we could weigh it, and say it weighs 600 pounds and it produces 200 horsepower. Well, the power density would be, or you could rate it in kilowatts, maybe 300 kilowatts, and it weighs 600 pounds, or let's call it 300 kilos, 300 watts. You'd have one watt per kilo, something like that.
Gotcha.
I'm getting my numbers. I'm getting confused on my numbers, but you have aerial power density, gravimetric, which is by weight power density, and volumetric power density. So that's where the gold is. You want high power density sources. And so in the data center, what we're seeing too, to build on what you're saying is these data centers are using more and more power per square meter all the time, because it makes more sense to harness more computing power in smaller and smaller footprints, because you get more work out.
Right. Okay. So large power density is a large power output with a low physical footprint, basically.
That's another way to think about it.
So power output per unit of physical footprint, whether that's volumetric or weight or all these things you said.
Yeah. Area, volume, or weight. But yeah, it's a measure of energy flow. That's what power density is, right? It's a measure of energy flow that you can harness from this given thing, right?
Gotcha.
So it's particularly important when you talk about area, because we want to conserve the natural landscape. We don't want to cover the world with these stupid, wind turbines. That's dumb.
Yeah.
We want to keep a small footprint, because that's the environmental ideal. We want to leave space for Bambi and the birds. And I'm avidly interested in that. We don't, this idea, I'm just talking with some people in Rhode Island a few minutes ago. We're going to put offshore wind turbines in the middle of North Atlantic right whale habitat. Are you out of your effing mind? I mean, it's like, the Sierra Club is in favor of this madness. I mean, you just got to be joking, but it's just, the world has gone nuts with a lot of this stuff.
Indeed, it has. Okay, man, this is a fascinating conversation. Robert, thank you for coming on. It's great to have you again. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Always happy to do it, Robert. Great fun. These are important issues. It's my purpose and my passion, and this is what I do. I don't play golf. I'm not going to retire. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. But juicetheseries.com for the film. I'm on Substack. Did I mention juicetheseries.com?
I was going to ask you where people can find you on the internet, but if they don't know it's juicetheseries.com yet, then I don't think there's any hope.
And I write almost exclusively on Substack now, robertbryce.substack.com. That's where I do almost all my writing. I have a piece that I published just a day or so ago on high voltage transmission that is related to the things we're talking about here. But and then my website, robertbryce.com, the Renewable Rejection Database, Power Hungry Podcast. I'm easy to find on the Google.
Beautiful. Robert, thank you so much.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you.